was born in 1971 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I have no recall, no recollection whatsoever of Pittsburgh, but I grew up as a Pittsburgh Steelers and a Pittsburgh Pirates fan nonetheless. I moved around a bit with my parents, and the place that I considered my childhood home was a small town called Jamestown, New York, which is just outside of Buffalo, New York. And both my parents were doctors practicing in this small town. And, I loved music, but the problem was I absolutely sucked at music. I couldn't read music. I was tone deaf. I couldn't hit a beat for my life. My choir master in high school told me and two other guys, you should lip sync through this because you guys are throwing us all off. And he was kind enough to give me a good grade, but I learned how to lip sync. I was absolutely fascinated, obsessed with MTV growing up. It had just emerged when I think I was in maybe junior high. That's all I could watch all day, all night. I memorized every video that came out. I knew every VJ's name by first name basis. What I noticed was there was no Asian VJs, and I thought that was a bit weird. And then when I watched all the music videos, it was often there were white music acts, black music acts, and then later on Latin, Spanish-speaking, Spanish-singing music acts, but no Asian acts. Again, because there were so few minorities where I grew up that we knew all the families who happened to be South Asian Americans and Chinese Americans. And so in many ways, I grew up kind of in an isolated bubble. And I know for me, very young, I was often very frustrated by stereotypes. And I know for me, as I was growing up, the few Asian, Korean, American friends that I had, they were all sort of products of maybe their parents' sort of aspirations. I didn't want to be pigeonholed or stereotyped as, oh, he's good at math, or oh, he has to become a doctor or a lawyer. But I think I was very lucky in the sense that both my parents were doctors, and they actually encouraged me not to become a doctor. They gave me a lot of leeway and a lot of space to try things, make some mistakes, but to find sort of what fit with me. So when I went to Dartmouth College, I actually changed majors quite a few times. Early on, I felt like, well, maybe I want to consider a career in finance. So I started as an economics major, but as fate would have it, I failed out of that major gloriously and miserably. I actually utilized my time off at Dartmouth to do a transfer term out at UC Santa Barbara. And of course, I picked the courses that involved East Asian studies. But at the time, I was like, what is this Asian American studies thing? And so I signed up for a bunch of those courses. And then more importantly is when I signed up for the Asian American class, we had no books. It was all photocopies put in binders. I'm like, well, what is this? The field was so new. There were so few books written about it. I think at the time, the only book that I could get was Joy Luck Club. And then everything else was Xeroxes. And, I was like, this isn't good. And what I learned was the history of Asians and Asian Americans in the entertainment and media industry and the portrayals, often the negative portrayals and the stereotypes. And it got me thinking, why was it like this? And more importantly, why is it not changing? And it got me thinking about entertainment and media. And so when I went back to Dartmouth, I changed my major and pursued film studies and creative writing. And my parents, as much as they loved me, they pulled me aside and they said, we have a hard time telling our friends at cocktail parties what your major is. We're paying this much money for you to go to an Ivy League school. You don't understand how hard it is for us to tell them that you're studying film and creative studies. They didn't even know those are academic courses. And so I decided, well, I could make myself happy, but my parents happy. And I tweaked my major and eventually graduated as a government and Asian studies modified major. And when I came out to Korea right after college, I was supposed to start graduate school here in Korea. But I had some time before graduate school classes started. And so I landed a gig teaching English, but not to little children or to high school kids wanting to get into college. I actually kind of lucked out and was asked to teach English to a bunch of music label executives who happened to work at different international music labels here in Korea. I met them. It turns out they didn't really need English language lessons. They just were shy guys who were just bombarded with these new trends coming in from overseas, particularly from the US. And the two trends that they had to come to terms with and figure out how to market and how to promote was alternative rock and hip hop. This was something they had never experienced or never knew how to deal with. And I just remembered, just really hilarious conversations where, they would have to study the lyrics to make sure it would fly through the censors. And they're like, if this guy's talking about this is supposed to be really good, why does he keep saying it's bad? And I had to explain, when Michael Jackson puts out an album and says bad, what he really means it's really good. And then, obviously I was young and I was single and I was a guy and I wasn't often going to language classes. So I went out to catch up with a friend of mine from college who was in Korea. He had just worked on a Korean film. And I crashed this Korean movie party, debut party. A waiter at this particular club grabbed me from the back of my neck and dragged me through the back of this karaoke and threw me in a back room. And there's a bunch of these older gentlemen asked me, what am I doing there? And I realized I just got busted. I just crashed this party. And I told them the straight truth. And they're like, no, it's fine. You stay. They spoke English. And they asked me, what are you doing in Korea? And I explained them, my college buddy worked on this film. He told me to come out. But I told them, I'm here doing graduate work and I'm currently, just teaching English to a bunch of music guys. And they're like, well, what do you miss most about America? And I told them, I miss MTV. And that's when everything stopped. And they just kind of leaned back and they're like, keep talking. MTV was being broadcast out of Hong Kong on a thing called Star TV. And that was the first time I was like, wow. They're Asian VJs playing Asian music and Western music on television. And I just remembered, instead of going to language classes, I would often go to cafes in and around Seoul just to watch that satellite feed. And I'd just sit there memorized. I'm like, that's so cool, but why is it not going beyond Asia? So I was explaining everything to this guy, and they told me, I just got the license to launch a music television channel in Korea. And of course, I didn't believe him. And I was like, you're full of shit. So we kept partying, kept drinking. He gave me his nondescript business card with just a name and a phone number. He's like, call me in about 2 weeks. And I'm like, why? It's like, I got to go to the Cannes Film Festival when I come back. And I'm like, you're full of shit and whatever. But I took the card, I kept it. And I went into the office a few days later. I was like, I met this guy at a club and he said he was going to start a music channel. And he's like, do you want us to find out? I was like, yeah, sure. I gave them the card, and then they looked at it, and they called me. Come to the office now. I'm like, what happened? And they're like, that guy you met at the club, yeah, he actually did get the license to start a music channel in Korea. And I'm like, oh, boy. So I called him a few weeks later, showed up, and I interviewed. And, I interviewed for a position at Korea's first music television channel. But at the time, I didn't think Korean music, let alone Korean music television, had much of a future. I mean, it was, for me, very painful to watch the early days of Korean music. It was like watching karaoke TV. Nothing was in sync. The dance moves weren't in sync. The lips weren't in sync. Everything just felt like a karaoke video. So I asked this guy, my first boss, could I work part-time for you and then still go to school? And I remembered the day where he just looked me straight in the face and said, what would it take for you to quit school and work full-time for me? And he's like, how much? I was like, I don't know. And I kind of wild guessed on what a professor makes because that was my end game. And he said, done. He called his secretary and said, draft me a contract, put this number down. And he said, are we good? And I'm like, yeah, sure, yeah. Problem was I didn't have the heart to tell my parents. So they rolled into Korea. They were looking for me in the dormitory. I had moved out by then quietly. And the security guy, he's like, oh, yeah. That guy, he moved out a few days ago. So my parents were wondering, like, what's going on? So I had to tell them, I dropped out of graduate school. to work in music television. And they're like, what? So thank God my boss, he's like, yeah, I knew that was going to be a hard buy-in from your parents. So he was kind enough. He took my parents out to dinner and explained everything. And I just remembered that both my mom and dad looked at each other and they're like, all these years we thought he was wasting just watching MTV all day, all night. It might actually work out. So they gave me their blessing, and that's how I got my start in my business and my career. I can't believe it's almost been 25 plus years working in the music industry. I remembered how disruptive music television was to not just American, but more importantly, global pop culture, this idea of a global youth culture. I was in Times Square shooting an MTV documentary. What happened was, as I was shooting B-rolls, and the MTV headquarters, Times Square, TRL, Total Request Live Studios are right there. And usually I expected a line of people waiting to get in. Figured, well, maybe the line would go there, but no. There was this other line, and it kept going. And it went past Times Square, so I just followed that line. And it turns out it was the day that the new Apple iPod with the screen came out. And I was like, oh my God. I realized right there and then that the future of music was moving away from the TV screen to the small screen. But I got frustrated by the speed of MTV's moves into the digital space. So I thought it was best that I just go out and do it myself, do it on my own. Once I saw what digital and digital music could do, I realized that this was going to help not just Korean, but Asian American artists get that breakout and breakthrough that I thought was just way long overdue. I look back at my career and unlike my parents who picked a profession that they could basically do from right after college until right when they retire, I realized pretty quickly that wasn't going to be me and that can't be me. And so I look back and I realized that every 5 to 10 years, I go through maybe phases or chapters. The goal is still the same, the passion is still the same, but the platform or the vehicle or the sort of trajectory often changes. Someone, thank God, told me early in my career that if you go on a straight line, it's no fun. If it's a roller coaster with a lot of crazy ups and downs, you might get sick, but that's the fun of it. And yeah, definitely in my career, I've had some roller coaster moments, some highs and some lows, and some things that go sideways and maybe sometimes off the rails. But again, eventually, I would say I did okay. Hi, my name is Bernie Cho, and this is my Korean American story.